We are continuing today, Meretz Hashem, in Parak Aleph of Pirkei Avos, and we find ourselves in Mishna Zayin, Mishna 7. So the Mishna says as follows: Nitai Ha'arbeli Omer. Nitai Ha'arbeli said, Harchik mishachin ra, distance yourself from a bad neighbor. Ba'tischaber l'rasha, don't go ahead and associate or connect yourself with a wicked person. Ba'tisash min ha'paranos, and literally again, do not give up or do not despair from paranos, from punishment or suffering. The Rabbeinu Yonah explains what's happening over here. So first he says something amazing. What does it mean, harchik mishachin ra, distance yourself from a bad neighbor? So the Rabbeinu Yonah writes, he says, sometimes people are moving into a home, they're moving into a neighborhood, and so they inquire about the nature of the house, the amenities. The Rabbeinu Yonah says, the same way that you ask about the house and the square footage and the property taxes, Kain lo yisha ala shchim. Make sure to ask about your neighbors. Imra'im heim yirchak mem b'latov mimkarv. If the neighbors are bad, ultimately, again, run far away. But if the neighbors are good, ultimately one could connect themselves. So, harchek mishachin ra, again, the Mishnah essentially sensitizing us to that our surroundings have an impact on us. So many times in life we think that we can engage in certain activities or certain behaviors, but I know there's bad influences, but I'll keep those influences at bay. I'll keep them in check. I'll keep them far away. And the truth is, while that's such a nice thought, very often it's virtually impossible. That at the end of the day, we are impacted by everything that happens all around us. And there, if you see there's a bad neighbor, you see there's bad influences, you better distance yourself from that. Because at the end of the day, even if I don't engage in the same behaviors, ultimately just through osmosis, just being in the atmosphere of negativity leaves its residual impact on who and what I am. Do not go ahead and literally connect yourself or associate with a wicked person. And here the Rabbeinu Yonah says something amazing. He says, Shu onesh gadol shein kamoso, ki achit hachamer im pashabo asaver achas. So Rabbeinu says something amazing. If a person sins, they do one avera. Aval zeh, but if you associate with a rasha, but if you associate with Rasha, connect yourself with a Rasha, then ultimately, again, you share in all of his faults and in all of his iniquities. So this is really an incredible idea. So if a person commits an Aveira, I've committed one Aveira. But if I connect myself with the wrong people, then suddenly, again, there's a sense of almost like mutual responsibility or collective responsibility for the actions and behaviors of the other. So a really incredible idea. Almost echoing the same type of sentiment. So harchek mishachin ra ultimately is telling us, be careful about putting yourself in the company of bad people, because at the end of the day, everyone that you associate with will have an impact on who you are. The Mishnah therefore says, and don't connect yourself with a Rasha. In other words, if you go ahead and you don't listen to the first part, and you do connect with a Rasha, just understand that now, by dint of being associated with him, and ultimately, again, being in the same circles and coexisting together, there's a certain level of mutual responsibility that is created. So suddenly now, again, this level of responsibility and culpability that one has to go ahead and one has to assume. The last phrase, do not despair from punishment. So here, on the most basic level, the Pashup Pshat of the Mishnah is Mishnah telling us that a person shouldn't be scared of difficulties. So often in life we're scared of discomfort, we're scared of pain, we're scared of difficulties. And the Mishnah says, don't be afraid. Whatever life throws your way, you can handle. Right? Whatever Chosh Baruch Hu throws my way, I can handle. That's the most important thing to remember. But Rabbeinu Yonah understands this in a different way. Rabbeinu Yonah writes, Samach shnei dvar ma'ela va'amar. Actually, al tisash min ha'paranos, do not despair from punishment, actually is connected to the previous statement of al tischaber l'rasha, do not associate with a wicked person. What does it mean? Al tischaber l'rasha, why shouldn't you go ahead and connect with a wicked person? She'en l'cha le'esyayish min ha'paranos, because don't think you could escape punishment. In other words, sometimes a person will associate with the wrong people, and he'll justify it. You know what? I'm not doing what they're doing. I'm not engaged in what they're doing. I'm not behaving like the way they're behaving. I'm fine. I'm fine. And here the Mishnah says, be careful not to connect yourself with a Rasha. Why? Because atisyash min ha'paranos, you will not escape judgment. Right? Don't despair. Judgment will catch up. Punishment will catch up. Your surroundings always have a dramatic effect on who and what you are. And this seems to be the overarching theme of this particular Mishnah. Namely, the power of the influences around us. So often in life, as you mentioned before, we allow ourselves to be in certain circumstances knowing that the influences are negative and adverse, but somehow we convince ourselves that we can rise above them. They're not going to permeate my soul, not going to permeate my lifestyle, not going to permeate my home. And Nikta Harabeli was much smarter than we are, and he says, don't do it. Don't do it. Number one, he says, try to be proactive and recognize, don't put yourself in the proximity of negative influences. That's harchek mishachin ra. Don't put yourself to begin there, right? Don't put yourself in the proximity of negative influences. But let's say one did. So let's say I allowed myself to be in the proximity of negative influences. Then, al tischaber l'rasha. Then make sure not to forge bonds, not to forge relationships. It's tragic to say, but there are certain people with whom one has to maintain an arm's length relationship because they're not a healthy influence. They're a negative influence, maybe even a toxic influence. So al tischaber l'rasha means if you ignored the first part of the Mishnah and you didn't go ahead and run away from the negative influences, okay, at least don't go ahead and cultivate them once you're there. And again, lest you think that, what's the big deal? What is the big deal? After all, I'm not doing anything. I'm not engaging in the negative behavior. Never think for a second that you can go ahead and escape the power of your influences. If you're connected with the Rasha, and you're ultimately coexisting with the Rasha, and you have a relationship with the Rasha, and there is some deeper level of connection as we spoke about, please understand that is going to have a residual effect on who and what you are. And ultimately, again, unfortunately, that'll lead to liability and lead to culpability. Don't think that punishment, that judgment will not come. Ultimately, again, anything and everything that we allow ourselves to be exposed to, and every influence which ultimately, again, surrounds us, has a dramatic effect on who and what we are, the people we are, and the people we become. Okay, we'll stop over here for today. Shkoyach, everyone.